The snow came sideways as if flung by a bitter, unseen hand. It bit at her cheeks, crawled beneath her scarf, and filled the folds of her skirt with ice. For hours, maybe longer, she'd pressed forward through the white nothing, her youngest slung to her chest, the other three trailing behind like tired shadows. The wind swallowed their whimpers. The sky had closed its eyes. Her boots were soaked through soles worn to the stitching. She could no longer feel her toes. They moved because she willed them to one step another. Then stop. Then breathe. Then beg herself again. One more. A fence post, half buried in snow, loomed ahead like a grave marker. She reached it and leaned, eyes closed, the wood against her back. The child on her chest was too still. She loosened the shawl and looked. Pale, mouth slightly open. No cry, no breath warm against her collarbone. She pressed her fingers to his neck, felt nothing but her own shaking. She didn't scream. There was no air left for that. Instead, she knelt, cradled him to her breast, and began to rock, though there was no rhythm in the wind, no warmth in her arms. Behind her, the other children clustered together, silent. One of them coughed a wet, hard sound that hurt to hear. Somewhere far off, hooves beat against the crusted snow. Not fast. Measured. Reluctant. Then a shadow broke through the white. A man on horseback, oilskin coat heavy with frost. He pulled the reins and stopped a few paces away, studying the scene without speaking. The horse's breath puffed out in thick, tired clouds. She didn't look up. Let him see. Let him ride on. What difference could it make now? But he didn't ride on. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching under him, and approached with caution, as if nearing a wounded animal. "Miss," he said, voice deep, not unkind. She kept rocking. "Miss," he tried again. "The child. He's gone." A long silence passed. Then the man knelt, careful not to crowd her. "There's a line shack a few miles back. Just a box with a stove and some wood. Not much, but better than out here." She said nothing. He looked at the other children. The tallest girl, maybe 10, held the hand of the smallest. Both stared at him like he might vanish if they blinked. The middle boy's lips were blue. "I can take one on the horse with me," he said. "You and the rest can follow. I'll ride slow." Still, she didn't move. He looked at the child in her arms. "Let me carry him. I'll wrap him up. Keep him safe. You'll see him again once we get inside." Her jaw twitched. Her fingers tightened around the boy's body. "I swear it," he said, and this time something in his voice caught a softness or maybe a wound. She nodded once. A small, broken motion. He took the child, gently wrapping him in a wool blanket he'd pulled from his saddlebag. The girl watched every move. When he stood again, his jaw was tight and he said nothing more. He lifted the middle boy onto the horse, climbed up behind him, and looked down at the woman. "It's west. Just keep walking till you see a stand of dead cottonwoods, cabins past them." She gave another faint nod. Then she took the hands of her daughters and the four of them began to walk. The wind didn't let up, but now it had direction. A thread to follow through the white. The shack was smaller than she'd pictured, just a squat timber box nearly buried in snowdrift, but the smoke curling from its stovepipe looked like a miracle. The door hung open, and inside the smell of heat and damp wool and something frying hit her hard enough to stagger. He had set the boy's body on a folded quilt in the corner, his small face covered. The other children sat in a tight line near the stovecoats, off, feet bare and steaming. The oldest girl's hands were wrapped in cloth. Her cheeks were flushed from thawing skin. The man looked up when the woman entered, but he didn't speak. Just handed her a tin cup and stepped back. She held it tight between her palms, grateful for the burn. The liquid was thin, hot, and bracing, some kind of coffee, maybe. She drank without asking. The world around her felt distant, like she was watching it from beneath thick glass. Her legs shook beneath her and she sank to the floor by the stove. For a long while no one said a word. Then the man still seated by the boy's body spoke softly. "I seen death on the prairie before. He rides quiet, comes fast." She didn't look at him. He was the only one still nursing. "I gave him everything I had." The man nodded like that made perfect sense. "When my brother died, he was 12. Took a spill from a barn loft. Hit his head wrong. There was no doctor closer than 70 miles, and by the time we got to him, he was already somewhere else." He turned the tin cup in his hand. "Afterward, my mother sat by his bed for a week. Never left the room. I used to think she was waiting for him to come back. But she told me later she was afraid if she stopped watching, she'd forget the shape of him." The woman blinked hard, then stared into the stove. The fire popped. The wind shrieked against the walls like it wanted in. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "Martha." He gave a short nod. "Jonas." The little girl nearest the stove coughed again. Jonas reached into his pack, pulled out a jar and spooned something dark onto a rag. "Mullein and honey," he said. "Warmed it on the stove. Won't taste good, but it'll help her lungs." Martha took it without a word and knelt to press the poultice to her daughter's chest. The child winced, then leaned into her mother's hands. Jonas watched. "You alone long?" "Since early fall." She smoothed the cloth gently. "My husband went to find work. Never came back. Might be dead. Might have just kept going." He didn't ask which she believed. "Where were you headed?" "I didn't know anymore." She looked over at the quilt in the corner. "I just kept moving." Jonas stood and pulled a small cast-iron skillet from the stove. He divided the contents onto 4 battered tin plates, beans, a little biscuit, and salted pork, and set them out for the children. They ate like they hadn't seen food in days. Maybe they hadn't. Martha didn't take a plate. "You need to eat," Jonas said. "I can't." "Not now." He said nothing, just took her cup and filled it again. The stove hissed, the wind howled, and the little ones slowly drifted toward sleep. Only Martha stayed upright, staring at the quilt in the corner, fingers clenched around the empty cup. Jonas set down his own plate and pulled a second quilt from a chest in the corner. He draped it around her shoulders and didn't try to touch her. "He deserves a proper place," she said at last. "Not out here, not like this." He nodded. "When the ground softens, we'll build something. I'll help." "We?" He looked her full in the face for the first time since she'd entered. "A soul ought not do that kind of thing alone." She didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. Ride steady, subscribe, and stay the course. Morning came, slow and gray, seeping in through the cracks like regret. The wind had died down, but the cold remained hard and unmoved. Martha woke on the floor, still sitting upright, the quilt pulled to her chin. Her neck ached. Her hands were cramped and raw. For a moment she didn't move, afraid to. The world had changed while she slept, and she didn't trust it. The corner of the cabin was empty now. The boy's small body was gone. She sat up fast, the blanket falling away. Her heart bucked in her chest. Jonas stood by the door, wiping snow from his coat. "I wrapped him in canvas. He's outside now where it's colder. Safer." She tried to speak, but her throat closed around the words. "I didn't bury him," he added. "You said not like this." "I heard you." Martha swallowed, nodded once. Her shoulders folded inward. The children were still asleep on a shared bed of blankets, limbs tangled. The smallest girl had her thumb in her mouth. The older one had wrapped her arms around the middle boy like she meant to keep him from slipping away in the night. All of them breathing alive. Jonas pulled off his gloves and crouched by the stove. He opened the door, stirred the embers, added more wood. The fire jumped, casting long, strange shadows across the room. "I've got salt and flour. Could make griddle cakes," he said, not quite looking at her. "Nothing fancy." She nodded again. He moved carefully, deliberately. She watched the way he cracked eggs with one hand, how he tested the pan's heat with a drop of water. The skillet hissed. Soon the smell of something close to food filled the air, and the children began to stir. The boy, the middle one, sat up first. His hair stuck up like hay. "Mama, I'm here." His shoulders dropped, and he lay back down, comforted by nothing more than her voice. Jonas handed her a small plate. The cake was lumpy and flat, but warm. She held it in both hands like something sacred. "You don't talk much," she said after a while. "I talk when there's something worth saying." She took a bite. It stuck in her throat, but she swallowed it anyway. Jonas sat by the stove again, his legs stretched out before him, boot heels crossed. "This shack's part of an old drover line. Cattlemen used it back when the trails still ran through here. Been years now. You live in it?" "No. I was passing through, checking fence lines for a rancher east of here. Thought I'd hole up till the storm broke." He paused. "Didn't figure on company." Martha looked around at the walls, the low ceiling, the dark corners. "You mind?" "If I minded, I'd have kept writing." One of the girls sat up, rubbed her eyes. "Mama, is it morning?" "Yes, sweetheart." "You're safe." The child looked at Jonas. "Who's he?" Martha looked at the man by the fire. "That's Mr. Jonas. He helped us." The girl stared at him, solemn and wide-eyed, then offered a whisper of a smile. "Thank you." He nodded once, like it embarrassed him. The day passed in slow, quiet work. Jonas fixed the broken hinge on the door. Martha cleaned what she could. The girls helped gather kindling. The boy sat on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, drawing lines in the ash with his finger. Later, when the sun sagged low, Jonas saddled his horse and took the canvas-wrapped bundle out beyond the cottonwoods. Martha followed alone. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But she stayed there a long time after Jonas rode back. That night she stood by the window watching frost lace across the glass. Behind her, the children slept. Jonas was still up mending a boot by lantern light. His hands were steady, quiet, like everything he did. "I don't know what happens now," she said. He looked up. "Most don't." She turned toward him. "I can't go back. There's nothing left." He met her eyes. "You don't have to." Martha crossed the room and sat beside him on the floor. The lantern glowed between them, soft and gold. She didn't say thank you. He didn't ask for it. They just sat in the silence, shoulder to shoulder, the storm behind them. The thaw came slowly, like an old man climbing stairs. Days passed with little change, each one a shade brighter, a touch softer around the edges. The snow still lay thick, but it no longer screamed when the wind passed over it. Birds began to return, just a few at first, finches and jays, and the sound of their wings stirred something long quiet in Martha's chest. Inside the shack, life took on rhythm. Not easy, not gentle, but steady. Each morning, Jonas stepped outside to check traps or gather wood, his boots crunching over crusted snow. Martha rose soon after, tending to the fire, heating water, brushing tangles from her daughter's hair. She moved slower than she used to. Every joint ached, every breath still carried weight. But her hands had purpose again. The children adapted fast. They made a game of hauling water from the creek, of stacking wood, just so, of sweeping the dirt floor until it shone. The middle boy, Thomas, followed Jonas like a pup, asking questions, pointing at tracks in the snow, testing his courage by touching the horse's flanks. Jonas didn't smile often, but when he did, it changed the whole line of his face. Like the sun catching on a frozen pond, just a flash, then gone. But Martha noticed. She noticed everything. They spoke more now. Not about the past, that still hung between them unspoken like breath on cold glass, but they spoke of practical things. The weather, the fence lines, the state of the barn nearby and whether it might be patched. Martha learned he'd once dreamed of having his own herd, a few hundred head on good land, not for wealth, just to work with his hands and know he'd built something that could last. She didn't laugh at him. He looked surprised by that. One afternoon, while the children napped, she stood outside near the fire pit rubbing lard into a scrap of leather for mending shoes. The wind was light, the air damp with melt. Jonas walked over from the woodpile, wiping his palms. "You work harder than most men I've known," he said. She didn't look up. "I have no choice." He nodded, watching her. "I know." A beat passed. Then she said, "Back in Missouri, I used to be a midwife." That made him glance over, curious. "Before I married," she said, "before I had children of my own, I brought 27 babies into this world. Knew how to stop a hemorrhage, turn a breech, stitch a tear." She paused. "Now I can't even keep my own child alive." The wind shifted. Jonas knelt beside her, quiet. "I still wake up hearing him cry," she whispered. "I still turn to hush him." Jonas didn't touch her, just sat there in the cold mud boots soaked through, head bowed. "When my brother died," he said, "I used to wake up swinging. Thought I heard him fall again. For years it was like that." Martha set down the leather. "What changed it?" He looked at her. "I guess I decided I didn't have to carry it alone." Her eyes locked with his. For a long time neither moved. Then she stood, brushed off her skirt, and turned toward the shack. "Supper'll be ready soon." That night they ate together, shoulder to shoulder, with the children curled like pups near the stove. Martha reached for the coffee pot, poured 2 cups, handed one to Jonas without looking. Their fingers brushed, and neither of them pulled away. The next morning Jonas handed her a small bag, seeds, beans, corn, onion. "From the bottom of my pack," he said. "Still good if we start soon." She turned the bag over in her hands. "You mean to plant?" "I mean to try." She stared at the dry kernels, the ghost of green inside them. A garden would mean staying. Not just for now, but through the next season, maybe longer. She looked up at him, and for the first time since the storm she didn't feel lost. Spring came slow and mean. The kind that teased warm sun one day, sleet the next. The snow didn't melt so much as rot, collapsing in wet chunks that left the earth underneath pocked and bruised. The creek swelled and churned with the runoff, loud and wild. Mud coated everything. Boots sucked into it. Wagon wheels spun in place. The children came back every day, soaked to the knees. Still things grew. Jonas fenced a patch of land behind the shack with rough-hewn posts and wire he'd salvaged from the hills. Martha and the children turned the soil with sticks, and hands worked the seeds into rows with stiff fingers. The little girl, Anna, talked to each mound like it was a friend. Martha watched her and didn't stop her. A field could use a few good words. They were no longer just surviving. They were building. Nights were the hardest. Not cold anymore, but long. Still quiet. Still dangerous, but in a different way. Grief lived there in the space between footsteps, in the echo of a child not crying. Martha would lie awake, fingers curled against her ribs, and listen for things that weren't there. Jonas would be in the corner chair, whittling or oiling a rifle, the creak of wood the only sound between them. One night she sat up and said, "Do you think he's at peace?" Jonas didn't ask who. "I think peace looks different for everyone." She nodded slowly. "I buried his name with him. Haven't spoken it since." Jonas set the knife down. Waited. His name was Eli. He held her gaze. "Thank you for telling me." She turned away, her breath catching. "He had this way of curling his fist in my dress when he slept. like he thought I might leave. You didn't, Jonas said. Her hand covered her mouth. She closed her eyes and let the weight move through her. The next morning, Martha found a carved piece of wood on the porch step. A simple marker. A name etched in rough block letters, Eli. She didn't speak of it, just pressed her palm to the grain and left it there a long while. Work became ritual. Jonas hunted and repaired the roof. Martha cleaned and planted. The children hauled water and learned to read by firelight, tracing letters on slates Jonas had traded for in town. They made bread with coarse flour and lard, caught fish with string, and bent nails, boiled dandelion greens when nothing else was left. They grew into each other slowly. Jonas didn't touch her, not at first. But sometimes their hands would meet while reaching for the same tool. Sometimes his coat would be draped over her chair. Sometimes they stood a little too close in the garden without moving apart. One afternoon, after a long day mending a fence, they sat on the porch steps while the children chased each other in the dirt. Martha reached for the flask Jonas always kept at his belt. "Whiskey?" she asked. "Always," he said, handing it over. She took a small sip, grimaced. "You drink this by choice." He chuckled low in his throat. "You get used to it." They sat in silence for a while. Then she said, "You ever think about leaving this place?" He looked out toward the hills. "Used to. Not now." "Why?" He turned to her, slow and steady. "Because there's something worth staying for." She met his eyes. A long look. A knowing one. Neither smiled, but both of them understood something had shifted. That night, when the children were asleep and the fire had burned low, Jonas took a step toward her. Not bold, not certain, just enough. She didn't move away. He touched her hand first, calloused fingers brushing against hers. She looked down at them, laced rough and tender together, and then up at his face. She leaned in, rested her forehead to his. Neither of them kissed the other. They didn't need to. A late frost came through in May, turned the first bean shoots black overnight. Martha found them in the morning, brittle and bowed like something praying too long. She didn't cry, just stood there in the garden apron, caught by the wind, lips pressed thin. Jonas came up behind her, quiet as ever, and looked over the rows with her. "We'll plant again," he said. She nodded, but her shoulders stayed tight. "We did everything right. Still happens." She knelt down, dug a finger into the soil. Ground still soft underneath. "That's something." He handed her the seed bag without a word, and by noon the garden was full of tiny green hopes again. The loss didn't stop them. It never did. The season kept pushing forward, stubborn and raw. Calves were born on the neighbor's land, and word came through the trader that a school might open in town by fall. Jonas rode in twice a month for supplies, always coming back with more than he'd left, with books, nails, a bar of real soap once. He claimed a woman had forced it on him. Martha laughed when he said it, really laughed, the sound sudden and surprised. Jonas looked at her like it was the first sunlight after a long winter. He built a chicken coop with the boy. It leaned sideways, but it held. The oldest girl, Clara, started keeping track of their supplies on a scrap of old ledger paper, making careful notes in her stiff, upright hand. The youngest, Anna, followed Martha everywhere, holding tight to the hem of her dress like a kite string. They were becoming something. One evening, with the sky streaked pink and the smell of lilac on the breeze, Martha stepped outside to find Jonas oiling the hinges on the shack door. "You're fixing what works," she said. He glanced up. "Can't hurt to make it quieter." "For who?" He didn't answer right away. "Then I thought maybe you were tired of the sound it made when I came in late." She leaned against the post. "I've gotten used to it." He wiped his hands on a rag, then tucked it into his belt. "You asked me once if I ever thought about leaving. I remember. I used to think I didn't belong anywhere. Just drifted. Fences, cattle, firewood, next job. But this place, he looked toward the hills, then back to her. You and the kids. It feels like something I don't want to outrun. Martha's throat tightened. We're not easy. I'm not afraid of hard. She stepped down from the porch. Close now. The dusk made her eyes darker, more certain. Jonas, she said, quiet, what are you asking? He reached into his coat pocket, pulled something wrapped in cloth, opened it to reveal a thin copper ring dented at one side. Not fine, not new, but it caught the last of the light like it meant something. My mother's, he said. She wore it 43 years. Martha stared at it, silent. I'm not asking now, he said. Not today. Not yet. Just giving it to you. If you ever want it. She took the ring in her palm, closed her fingers over it. For a long moment neither of them moved. Then she stepped forward, closed the space between them, and laid her head against his chest. He held her quiet and solid, like a place to rest. Inside the cabin the children laughed at something. A pot simmered. Bread rose on the hearth. The wind had changed. There was a future waiting. Summer settled in like a cat in the sun, lazy, golden, and full of dust. The garden rose from the ground in earnest this time. Rows of beans, stalks of corn, onions swelling beneath the soil. Martha checked them each morning with the same care she once gave to fevered foreheads and newborn limbs. It became part of her, this tending, this building. The children ran barefoot now, skin brown with sun, hair wild with wind. They no longer flinched at loud sounds or shadows. They played until dusk, then collapsed into quilts with dirt under their nails and peace in their sleep. Jonas built a second room onto the shack using scavenged boards and patience. His hands were always working on tools, on fences, on small things that made life easier without drawing attention to themselves. Martha noticed. She always noticed. He never brought up the ring again. But sometimes she caught him looking at her hands when they worked dough or stitched cloth. Not longing. Just waiting. One evening in late July, a wagon appeared on the ridge. A stranger woman shape pulled by an old gray horse. Martha stepped out onto the porch, squinting into the sun. The wagon came slow, a limp wheel dragging in the dust. The woman wore city shoes and a scowl. Her hair was pinned too tight, her blouse sweat-stained despite her efforts. You Martha Collins? She asked, not bothering to dismount. Martha nodded. I'm your husband's sister, the woman said flatly. Came to find out if you was dead or not. Jonas had come around the corner with a pail of water. He froze at the sound, eyes narrowing. The woman noticed. Who's he? A friend, Martha said. Funny kind of friend living out here with your children? Martha stepped off the porch. Her voice stayed calm, but her jaw set. You're 2 years too late. He left us before the first frost. Never came back. Never sent word. Not a word. The woman climbed down stiffly. Well, I got a letter says he died in Kansas Territory. Fall off a horse or whiskey, nobody knows. He had nothing on him but a tin watch and a torn-up Bible. Martha stood very still. I thought I should tell you, the woman went on. Proper and all. There's no estate if you're wondering. No land. No money. Just him gone. Martha didn't cry. She didn't sit down. She just looked at the stranger and said, you can stay the night if you need. There's water. A bit of food. The woman blinked. You're not angry? I was, Martha said. Then I buried my son in the snow and walked 3 days through a blizzard. I used all my anger then. That night the stranger left before the sun rose. Never said goodbye. Martha stood in the doorway as the dust settled behind the wagon. The sky was soft with early light. Her hands rested on the porch rail. Jonas stepped up beside her, slow and quiet. You all right? She nodded once. Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out the copper ring. held it out. "I don't want what came before," she said, "but I'll take what's ahead if you'll have me." Jonas didn't speak, just slid the ring onto her finger and held her hand like it was something fragile and burning. Inside, the baby chicks peeped from the coop. Smoke rose from the stove. The land stretched wide and golden in every direction, unforgiving and full of promise. Martha stood there, hand in his, with the sun on her face and the past finally behind her. She was not lost anymore. If the land felt alive, subscribe and keep listening.